should be fired. Okay. So two-dimensional arrays. So your next programming assignment is going to handle two-dimensional arrays, and it's pretty complicated. Yeah, you guys are going to like it. It's good stuff. All right, so we've talked about computing row totals and then summing all of the rows, right? So this is just normal processing that occurs inside of a two-dimensional array, right? So there's always times when we need to iterate. And remember, summing all the rows is take a row, iterate through all the columns, summing the values that are inside of each one of those cells. We're going to do the opposite of that. Now we're going to process the columns rather than the rows, right? So take a row, take a column, iterate through all of the rows, processing each one of the values that are inside of each one of those columns as we go through. So let's talk about that. So we're going to, first off, just like we did with rows, we're going to talk about computing a single column. So computing a single column total looks like this. I need to create an integer. I really want to go in and do that. You guys remind me to go and change the auto. Yeah, thanks. Tell me after class so that I can actually do it. So we're going to create one called total. And then we're going to set up a for loop, right? So for in I, well, we'll do C because we're talking about columns. So in C equal to 0, although we're not iterating through C, we're not iterating through columns at this point, so I will keep it I. As long as I is, did it again. As long as I is less than, what int array are we using? 3? Okay, so int array 3, any one of the rows, dot. Okay, there we go. I++. So, remember, if I do dot length at int array 3, right, int array 3 dot length, that's going to give me the number of rows that are inside of the multidimensional array. And if I do int array 3, and then I pick out a row, that's going to give me the number of columns that are inside of that particular row. We're going to assume, and the reason we're assuming this is because I'm never going to have you guys make a jagged edge array. We're going to assume that all rows inside of the array have the same number of columns inside of it, just to keep things simple. And so all we got to really do is pick a row. Now, it's dangerous to do it like I did right here, because what happens if we only have one row in this multidimensional array? So it's a multidimensional array that has only a single row inside of it, which makes it an array, right? So what's going to happen? Wow, I leaned on the space bar. What's going to happen if I say, give me int array row index 1 inside of here? Error, because row index 1 doesn't exist. If int array 3 only had a single row, that row's index is 0. If I say, give me row 1, index out of bounds exception. You will hear that all the time. Index out of bounds exception. Remember that one. Anytime you get that, that means you're trying to access something inside of the array that doesn't exist. So, in order to be careful, I'm going to use I, right? So if the 0 index doesn't exist inside of int array 3, then I've got bigger problems, right? I've got no data inside of there, so it just doesn't matter. So I'm going to use I just to be safe. Okay, so now we're going to take total, and we're going to add to it int array 3 what? I'm computing a, let's say, remember this is a single column. I guess I should have, and we're going to do column I can't remember how many are inside of there. There's 3 columns, so let's do column 3. Right, so I want to compute a single column total, and we're going to compute that column total on column 3. So I'd say int array 3. Remember it's row column. So row I, column 2, right? Because index 2. So in this case, because I was only doing a single column, I assume that the information is there. I could actually, instead of using I here, I could do 2, I guess, if I wanted to. It'd be okay to hard code that because I assume that data is going to be there. So we do need to get into error checking. Right, so that's going to iterate through in row whatever, right? So in our case, it's row 0, 1, 2. So we've got a single column, row 2. Let me go back up to the data that's up here, right? So row column 2 right here, and we're iterating through the rows. Row 1 has 3, row 2, 6, row 3, 9. So we're going to take 3 plus 6 plus 9. Now let's talk about jeez. All right, summing all the columns. So I'm going to say int column total is equal to 0. And then we will set up our for loop. So we're going to iterate through columns first, right? So C, as long as C is less than what? Int array 3 what? Dot length? What is that going to give me? What does int array 3 dot length give me? Huh? No, no, I'm not trying to access an index, so it's not going to give me index out of bounds. It'll either give me some number between 0 and infinity. Not really infinity. What is int array 3 dot length going to give me? The number of what? It's going to give me the number of rows, right? So if I say int array 3 dot length, that's going to return 3, but that is the number of rows that are inside of my, or think about it this way. So when I say int array 3 dot length, it's giving me the number of single dimensional arrays that are inside of my multi-dimensional array, right? So it's giving me each array that's inside of my multi-dimensional array. So if I want the number of columns, if I'm iterating through columns, then I've got to do, I've got to do this. So when I say int array 3i, I'm saying give me a specific row out of there. In other words, give me a specific single dimensional array that's inside of that multi-dimensional array and tell me the length of that one row. So that'll be the number of columns or the number of elements that are inside of that one array. So when I say int array 3i.length, that's how many elements are inside of that single array. In other words, how many rows are inside of my multi-dimensional array, or how many columns are inside of a multi-dimensional array. So that's the number of columns. If I'm iterating through columns, I want that. So now inside of here, I'm going to set column total to be equal to 0. And then I'm going to set up my inner for loop that's going to iterate through rows. Right, this time I want to use int array 3.length because that's telling me how many rows are inside of my multi-dimensional array, or in other words, how many one-dimensional arrays do I have inside of my multi-dimensional array. And then you want to say r++. Inside of here is where you want to actually do the summing, right? So you're going to say C total plus equals int array 3, and then, oh goodness, what am I going to put inside of here? Huh? Well, I don't have an I, right? There is no I integer inside of either one of my for loops. Oh, I did. there's the typo. So what goes inside of here? C does go in here, but which set of brackets does it go in? The second one, right? So it's rows, columns, rows, columns, rows. In other words, it's how many single dimensional arrays do I have and how many elements are in each one of those arrays, right? So it's rows and then columns. Right? So take the value that's inside of RC, which right now the first iteration of each one of these RC is going to be what? R is going to be what number? C is going to be what number? So that's cell 0, 0, which has what value inside of it? 1. Right? And then I'm going to iterate R. So the next value I'm going to get is going to be column 0, row 1, which is what value? 4. Row 1, right? So column 0, row 3, or row 2, index 2 is 7, and it's going to add those up, and then it's going to fall out of the inner for loop. So this is going to iterate through all of the rows, adding the values that's inside of there. And then we're going to do, oh goodness, we're going to have to add to a string, right? So here we would output or save the value in C total right there. So your next assignment is going to, well, maybe I need to make you guys an assignment that introduces multi-layered menuing systems before I give you the assignment that I'm thinking about giving you. Maybe I'll do that, right? Oh, maybe we can handle that in lab today. We can do a multi-layered menuing system inside of lab. In other words, a menu that when you choose certain options brings up another menu, right? Because you're going to be doing a lot of that in your assignment that you're going to do with multidimensional arrays. So the multidimensional array assignment is going to be to book seats on airlines, right? So purchasing tickets for airlines given a seating chart. And that seating chart is going to be a multidimensional array. So how many rows and how many seats are in each one of those rows inside of a plane, and booking those things through a menuing system. So you're going to be using multidimensional arrays like crazy inside of that assignment. All right, we're about to have a paradigm shift really quick and talk about inheritance a little bit in order to set up some stuff for what we're going to do next. So I'm going to ditch this and I'm going to create a new project. What is this one in? String format test. That's not what I want. So new project. Maybe. Yep. I'm going to call this project JFrame test. Let's see if I can set this up outside of here first so that we don't go too crazy. I got to think about the process really quick. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start using JFrame objects. JFrame objects are the basis for Java app development in the Swing library anyway. If you stick with me, next semester we'll go into Java FX, which is kind of the evolution of JFrame programming, but you need the background of JFrame programming in order to do Java FX programming. And then Java FX leads into Android development. It's a nice little stepping stone process that goes with these three types of development, right? So we're going to talk about JFrame development for now, and it's complicated enough for probably the rest of the semester. So we're going to talk about JFrame, the JFrame object and what it does, and how to utilize it. So the first thing I'm going to do really quick is I'm actually going to create a JFrame, right? So you got to have the java.swing library inside of there. And I'm going to call this thing frame, I guess. Why not? Now, JFrame is a palette on which you can do stuff, right? So think of it as a blank canvas that you can put whatever you want to on it. JFrame object can contain any number of controls and any number of what's called layouts on it. Now, a layout is going to be kind of a obscure concept to most of you guys because you haven't dealt with layout interface design maybe ever. Unless you've done Android development or iOS development or some other sort of, I'm trying to think of another one that used layouts. Mobile app development, for the most part, use layouts, although there's a bunch of other ones that use it as well. So JFrame, like I said, is a blank canvas, no big deal. There are properties inside of JFrame that you can change, right? So I'm going to say frame dot set size. Now, size can take two different arguments. Number one is a dimension, which is another object inside of the JFrame library. Or you can just set an integer of the width and the height. And in that case, it will actually render it in pixels. So you can create a JFrame of size, 300 pixels wide by 500 pixels high, let's say, right? So that's going to be a window that's 300 pixels wide, 500 pixels high, and the size of it will depend on whatever the resolution of the screen is that you're rendering it on. Make sense so far? Okay. It's making a pop-up window. Yeah, and we're setting the size of the pop-up window inside of there.
If you render it right now, would it pop up
No, it wouldn't pop up anything right now because I haven't told it to render I haven't told it to actually render the JFrame object yet. You have to explicitly tell it to render it. So let's try that a little bit. Let's do, and I've got to remember, these things are set in my templates. It's been forever since I've actually written them. Set default close operation. Default close operation. This is set what happens whenever somebody clicks the X on the window itself, right? So tell the JFrame object what to do when somebody clicks the F or the X. JFrame exit on close is the default. It is a constant that's inside of JFrame. And then we'll say frame dot set visible true. And that will render the object, right? So if I do this, and I make the project, and it runs, ta-da! Right? There's my blank canvas that I can do stuff with. I can do anything I want to with it. You can be as simple as put some text boxes and some labels on there and let people fill it out and hit a submit button and absorb that information into your program and do whatever you want to with it. Or you can be as complex as make it a media render where you can go out and allow people to choose media files that exist on the internet and render those media files inside of the application itself, right? So you can do, and we'll run that entire gambit inside of there. We will start simple and we will get extraordinarily complex as we go through. So there's my blank canvas. Now, that blank canvas has to have form. You have to do stuff to it in order to make the objects, the controls that you're going to put on there, render the way that you want to. And this is where we're going to start talking about layouts, right? So JFrame is it's okay for housing controls, but there's another object that actually is inserted inside of a JFrame that's called a panel. And panels are super useful because panels, you can set layouts inside of them, and you can actually have multiple panels on a single JFrame so that way you can change the layout from one part of the JFrame to another one. And so what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to create a panel object, add it to the JFrame object, and then I'm going to create a text box, and maybe a label and a button, right? Really simple interface. Label, text box, button, inside of a panel, inside of a JFrame. So I've created my JFrame object. Let's create a JPanel, not JOption pane, JPanel, and we'll call it container, I guess, new JPanel. So a JPanel by default gets a layout template, and that layout template is what's known as the flow layout. Now, flow layout, if you've ever done any HTML, CSS development at all, flow layout kind of works like HTML objects work. So it stacks stuff inside of its container object until it runs out of room. And when it reaches the end of the room that it has inside of its container object, it pushes the next object to the next line. Kind of like when you're typing a document in Word, right? As soon as it reaches the end of the line, it wraps to the next line. That's the way flow layout works. There's other layouts. There's one called grid layout, and there's one called border layout, and there's a whole bunch of other layouts, and you can nest them and all kinds of funny stuff. But we're just going to use the default flow layout for our panel, and then I'm going to create a J label, and a label is just it's just a piece of text that's out there, right? It's just a static piece of text. So I'm going to create a label called I don't know. Let's make a text box inside of there that somebody is supposed to enter. Well, let's do this. This will be good. So inside of here, the constructor is going to take a string, and that string is going to be what's actually going to be on the label itself. Username. Let's make another J label that's going to be called So you guys get an idea of what kind of interface I'm going to create? I'm going to create a pop-up that's going to be a login screen, right? In which case I probably want to adjust the size of this down a little bit. So username, password, and then I'm going to create associated J text fields, which are text boxes. Username, text box. New J text field, and then J text field password text box. New J text field. So I've got label. Now I got to have the button. J button. Submit button is what I'll call it. New J button. Right, so I've got all these objects, all these controls, right? Individual controls inside of here. Now I've got to one by one add those controls to my interface in the order in which I want them to render, right? So my process is going to be take all the controls, add them to the panel, and then add the panel to the JFrame. So in this section, I'm going to start adding stuff to my panel, which I called container. So I'm going to say container.add, container.add, username label, and then container.add username text box, and then container.add password label, and then container.add password text box, and then container.add submit button. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what did I name it? Frame.add container. Right, so put all the stuff inside of the panel and then add the panel to the frame. So let's go see what that looks like. Looks like this. Uh-oh. Need to add some size to my text boxes, it looks like, and render some stuff otherwise. Button doesn't have any value inside of it, but we got all the controls on there, right? Username, password, button, 2 text boxes. We just got to mess with it a little bit in order to make it look the way we want it to look, which is easy enough. And we'll do that next time. See you guys later.